"She's within her rights," Judith said, smiling like she was doing me a favor. "The drone didn't enter your home. It merely observed. Which is, by the way, legal under state aerial surveillance law." Her voice carried too easily across my lawn, loud enough for the retirees walking their dogs and the kids biking past to hear. She made sure of that. One hand rested on the remote in her palm. The other casually gestured at the drone, still hovering, still filming, outside my daughter's shattered bedroom window. I stared at the glass shards on the grass and replied without raising my voice. "You might want to double-check those laws before quoting them. Because what you're operating is a commercial-grade device over residential property lines without line of sight, and that's a felony in this county." She blinked. It was small, but the twitch at the corner of her mouth told me she didn't know that part. Not yet. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. "My name's Miles Kenner," I said, finally turning my body to face her fully. Acoustical engineer, former municipal consultant for Fairfax County. I helped draft the sound ordinance you're about to violate a third time today. "And that drone," I glanced up. "It's still pinging back to your IP." Judith's confident posture faltered, just slightly. Her sunglasses hid her eyes, but not the way her jaw tightened behind them. I didn't come from money, and I sure as hell didn't move to Willow Ridge for its golf cart parades or weekly HOA-sponsored jazz brunches. I came here for Ava, for a place she could sleep safely, a place where she could heal. That drone flew into her window at 6:14 a.m. She had just stopped having night terrors 3 months ago, just started sleeping in her own bed again. And now the only room she called hers had a shattered pane, scattered glass, and a new reason to flinch at shadows. That's what Judith didn't see behind her spreadsheet of fines and passive-aggressive newsletter blurbs. To her, Ava was just another household occupant, a line item. But to me, she was the only reason I'd kept the house after my wife left. The only reason I gave up the Pentagon contracts. The only reason I stayed civil. Until now. When I saw the drone drop out of the sky, I thought it was some kid's toy. But the camera that rotated to face the house mid-fall wasn't cheap. And the fact that it rebounded off the ledge, hard enough to crack the window but not drop, told me someone had tried to stabilize it. Judith didn't even pretend to deny it. "You'll receive a formal citation tomorrow," she added as she turned to leave. "Unauthorized window tinting and obstructed visual lines. You're welcome to file a response." I didn't follow her. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I walked up the porch steps and opened the door. Doctor inside, Ava sat cross-legged on the couch, her knees tucked into her chest, eyes wide behind a blanket she hadn't let go of since the crash. One shard of glass had landed on her desk, just inches from her drawing tablet. She didn't ask if we were moving. She didn't ask if the drone was coming back. She just whispered, "Do we still have the sign?" I knew what she meant. A year ago, when the HOA fined us for a hanging flower pot Ava had picked out for Mother's Day, she'd made a hand-painted sign that read, "Our house, our rules." I'd let her hang it from the porch railing for one night before taking it down to avoid another violation. We still had it, folded up in the closet like a forgotten flag. I crouched beside her and said, "We're gonna hang it back up." She nodded. But I wasn't thinking about porch signs anymore. I was thinking about resonance limits, decibel caps, and the one clause no HOA president in this state ever expects a homeowner to understand: the First Amendment protection of peaceful public demonstration, especially when sound is used to protest unlawful surveillance. This wasn't about curtains, or window panes, or drones. This was about showing my daughter that no one gets to hover over her world without consequences. This was about making sure Judith heard what silence had protected for too long. By the way, where are you watching from? The HOA violations didn't stop with the window. 2 days later, I came home to find a new envelope taped to my front door, another non-compliance warning. This one claimed my trash bins were visible from the street, even though they had been rolled to the side of the garage like always. That same evening, a citation for unsanctioned children's art appeared, referring to the sidewalk chalk Ava had drawn near the curb, a sun, a tree, and her name in pink cursive. I took photos of everything, not because I planned to appeal, not yet, but because I wanted a record of what a paper war looked like when it was waged by cowards with power. The next morning, I stood by the community bulletin board outside the clubhouse. It was covered in laminated rules, announcements about pest control, and a rotating list of residents who'd received HOA reminders. A new section had been added: curb appeal complaints, ongoing violations. We were on it, right below a family 2 streets over who'd been flagged for installing a porch swing without board approval. I looked around, a few others were reading too. A couple with a toddler in a stroller exchanged a look before quietly walking away. An older man with a cane muttered something under his breath and tore off one of the notices. He folded it into his jacket and shuffled off toward the tennis courts. The air was heavy with politeness. That artificial quiet you only find in places where no one wants to make a scene, but everyone has something to say. That's what Judith counted on: compliance through silence, exhaustion by design. I walked past the pool, down the paved trail that curved behind the back row of houses. The drone wasn't in the sky that morning, but I could still hear it in my head, the soft hum, the mechanical tilt of the camera, the way it had hovered just long enough for Ava to duck behind the curtain again. Mrs. Dorsey's backyard faced the trail. She was out watering her garden: roses, marigolds, a few struggling sunflowers. She'd lived here the longest, I'd heard. Since the subdivision opened, Judith never crossed her, and I always wondered why. "Morning, Miles," she called. I nodded. "Morning." She glanced toward the clubhouse bulletin, then back at me. "They're getting worse." "Yeah." She let the hose run over her ankle a second longer than necessary before turning it off. "You're not the first. But you might be the first one that doesn't fold." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I didn't. She added, "Just don't let them isolate you. That's how they win. They fine you until your neighbors look at you like a liability." That's exactly what was happening. At the grocery store, someone I barely knew avoided eye contact. At Ava's bus stop, 2 mothers whispered a little louder when I arrived. When I waved, they half nodded, tight smiles stretched over nerves they hadn't had last week. Judith didn't need permission to fly the drone anymore. She'd already launched something more effective: the slow rot of reputational erosion. Make a man seem difficult, disruptive, unsafe, and the rest handles itself. But I wasn't the only one noticing. At the community park, a boy named Eli tripped while skateboarding. I knelt to help him up, and his mom, Sarah, ran over. She apologized quickly, thanked me quicker, and then, before walking off, whispered. She recorded my backyard too. Said we had an unregistered trampoline. Later that day, I walked the block and counted 6 homes that had recent citation flags on their mailboxes. Not one of them had visible violations. Not unless you were hovering overhead. That evening, Ava sat under the oak tree with a book. Her bare feet were pressed into the dirt where roots broke through the lawn like veins. I watched her sketch shapes in the soil with a stick, glancing up every time a shadow moved. We used to call that spot her reading kingdom. Now she sat in it like a sentry. I stayed on the porch, making a list. Not of rules, but of people Judith had targeted, names I'd seen on the board, faces I'd seen avoid mine. I wasn't building a case yet. I was building a map, because this wasn't just about a drone anymore. It was about the machinery behind it, the quiet authority she wielded, the way she made neighbors question their own instincts. But patterns always leave residue, and Judith had been sloppy in ways she hadn't realized. The next HOA board meeting was held inside the Willow Ridge. Library annex, a glass-walled room with fluorescent lighting and folding chairs that made even the confident look small. I arrived 5 minutes early, but the room was already half full. Some were there for petty disputes, a broken mailbox, a mulch request. Others were there just to watch. Judith stood at the head of the table, in her usual navy blazer with the HOA seal pinned to the lapel, like it meant something official. She adjusted the mic even though no one ever used it. Her voice always carried just fine. To her right sat Mason Clark. He was thinner than I remembered. Not weak, but tired. Like someone living between lines he wasn't allowed to cross. His pen clicked once every 7 seconds, enough to notice, but not enough to call out. The HOA meeting agenda sat before him, perfectly straight. His name badge was the only one that didn't sparkle under the lights. It looked borrowed. When I signed in, Mason glanced up briefly, then dropped his eyes. That flicker told me everything. He knew what Judith was doing. He just didn't know what to do with it. I took a seat near the back, next to Mrs. Dorsey, who handed me a butterscotch candy without looking away from the front. The meeting dragged through the usual dog leash updates and lawnmower hour restrictions. Then came the community oversight review. Judith shuffled her stack of papers and smiled too wide. "We've issued 12 courtesy notices this week," she said. 5 converted to formal citations. "I want to thank Mr. Clark for managing the data input for those. Everything's fully documented." Mason nodded, but his hand trembled as it adjusted the edge of the folder. A man in the third row raised his hand. "Was that drone used again? Over my backyard on Wednesday?" Judith blinked. The drone is a sanctioned visual enforcement tool, used only in specific compliance reviews. "Is that written anywhere?" he asked. "Because I don't remember voting for that." Judith's smile didn't waver. "It was authorized under Clause 7.3 of the Visual Verification Addendum last quarter." I watched Mason's eyes track back and forth on the page in front of him. His lips moved slightly, reading something to himself. Then he shifted in his chair. Not much, but enough to notice. The click of his pen stopped. That was the moment I knew. He hadn't written that clause. Maybe hadn't even read it until now. After the meeting, as chairs scraped back and people filed out murmuring to one another, I lingered near the hallway exit. Judith gave me her usual tight-lipped glance and passed without a word. Mason came last, walking slowly with his binder pressed to his chest. I stepped into his path. "You know that clause is invalid, right?" "There was no resident vote. It's not in the charter." He didn't look surprised, just tired. "I can't talk about board documents outside the agenda." "You don't have to talk about documents," I said. "Just tell me something. Are you okay with this?" His eyes darted toward the ceiling, the kind of glance people make when looking for a camera or an escape route. "I'm not the one making decisions," he said, "but you're the one validating them." He didn't respond, but his grip on the binder tightened. "You know she flew the drone into my daughter's window. That's not visual enforcement. That's endangerment." Still, no answer. I stepped back. "You're better than this, Mason?" He stood there a moment longer, then walked past me without another word. But as he passed, I caught a change in his shoulders. Subtle, like something had cracked just enough for air to pass through. That night, I walked home slower than usual. Ava was asleep on the couch when I got back, wrapped in a quilt that still smelled faintly of my late mother's perfume. Her sketch pad lay open on the coffee table, a new drawing only half finished, a girl under a tree holding up a sign. I sat beside her and ran my hand along the worn edges of the oak floorboards. I hadn't won anything yet. Judith was still in control, but now I had a name behind the silence, and I'd seen what hesitation looks like when it starts to burn. Mason Clark wasn't a villain. He was a man caught in a trap of responsibility and fear, but cracks can spread, and one push, at the right time, can be enough. The next morning, a yellow tag flapped against my front door like a warning flag. Final notice, non-compliance penalty pending. Below that, in bold, daily fines may be levied beginning in 48 hours. This time, it wasn't about the trash bins or chalk drawings, it was the curtain. Ava's bedroom curtain, plain beige, the same one that had hung in every home we'd lived in since she was 5, had somehow violated Section 4.6, exterior-facing decor uniformity. I reread it 3 times just to make sure I wasn't missing something. But there it was, in clipped legalese. My daughter's curtain didn't match the approved list of HOA-suggested treatments. I didn't bother pulling it down. I sat in the living room, curtain still hanging, and listened to the hum of the refrigerator and the quiet tick of the wall clock. Ava was at school. The house felt hollow without her. Just drywall and threats. My phone buzzed, an automated message from the HOA app. Unresolved violations may affect community standing. A red badge pulsed beneath it, a countdown already ticking. They wanted me boxed in, outnumbered, drowned in notices until I either paid or left. So I did something else. I walked to the edge of Willow Ridge, where the manicured sidewalks gave way to the older roads of the original township. Past the golf course, beyond the synthetic lake, into the municipal zoning office where half the cubicles were empty and the carpet still smelled like glue. A clerk in wireframe glasses glanced up as I approached. "Looking for something?" "Drone, zoning laws," I said. "And any HOA surveillance authorizations for Willow Ridge." He blinked. "No formal permits filed for drone use in residential enforcement." At least not under that name I gave him, Judith's name. He typed, then frowned. Nope, no filings from her either. Could you print that? He nodded and fed the request through the aging machine beside him. While I waited, I wandered the public records kiosk. Most people ignored these things, binders full of zoning code, construction variances, and noise ordinances. But I didn't. I'd helped write one of them years ago. Not for Willow Ridge, but for a development 3 counties over. Enough to know the structure, enough to see what was missing. The printout slid into my hand with quiet finality. It wasn't what I'd come for. Not exactly. But it confirmed what I already suspected. Judith had no legal grounds for drone surveillance. No permits, no community vote, no documentation tied to parcel zoning. And that made her drone flights not just intrusive, but extra legal. On the way back, I passed the post office. 3 neighbors were inside, all whispering near the bulletin board. She got the Jacobs family last week, one said. Cited them for a dog bowl. Mine was for visible tire tracks, like it rained. Of course there were tracks. She's got a camera pointed straight at my yard. I swear it moved last week I didn't stop. But I slowed just long enough for one of them, Sarah, the mother of the skateboarding kid, to meet my eye. She didn't look away this time. Back home, Ava was already on the porch when I arrived. Her backpack rested against the oak tree, and she held the old sign, the one she'd painted last year, still wrinkled and faded at the edges. I sat beside her. "You're gonna fight back, aren't you?" she asked. I nodded. She set the sign down beside my boot. "Then I want this up again." We hammered it into the lawn with a rock and a piece of scrap wood. It didn't meet visibility regulations. It didn't match the color guidelines, but it was ours. Later that evening, I filed a formal request for the HOA's surveillance clause documentation under Community Transparency Protocol. I already knew what I'd get back. Generic language, no timestamps, no voting records. But I needed the paper trail. I needed them to answer with silence. Because silence under scrutiny is louder than any drone. The email came through just after sunrise. Subject line, request for HOA surveillance authorization. Body. All protocols are consistent with community safety standards as defined in the Willow Ridge Board Charter. Further inquiries may be directed through proper appeal channels. No attachments, no timestamps, no actual answer. That was the tell. I knew the language. I'd written enough reports to know the difference between a denial and a deflection. This wasn't a refusal. They were bluffing, and if they were bluffing, they were also exposed. I opened the charter. I'd requested it months ago when I first moved in, part habit, part paranoia. Back then, it seemed like overkill. Now, it was the only thing that mattered. The document was bloated with typical HOA boilerplate, lawn maintenance, parking designations, seasonal decor limitations. But nothing about drones, not one clause, not even a proposed amendment. And then I found it, tucked under Section 8.4. Observation equipment use, added as a community memo, not an actual bylaw. A memo couldn't authorize fines. A memo wasn't binding, and Judith had used it to issue over 24 citations this month alone. I needed confirmation. Not a second opinion, an expert one. Someone outside the HOA, someone who'd understand how this kind of oversight could spiral into liability. So, I called in a favor. An old colleague, Darren, worked with a civil liberties watchdog group now. We'd crossed paths years ago when sound ordinances clashed with surveillance tech. He picked up on the second ring. "Kenner, I thought you were done with this crap." "Apparently not. HOA again? Worse. They're flying drones." There was a pause, then a low whistle. "That's a lawsuit waiting to happen. They buried the clause in a memo. Never voted, never ratified, but they're using it to enforce fines. That's not just improper," Darren said. "That's structurally invalid. If you want an official opinion letter, I'll have one drafted in 24 hours. "I don't want a letter," I told him. "I want optics." "I want it loud," he laughed. "Then you'll want my contact at Channel 9. HOA Watchdog segment runs Fridays." I hung up with a name, a direct line, and a warning. "Make sure you're ready. They'll come after you harder once they smell exposure." I was already past that point. That afternoon, Judith sent 2 more citations, one for visual disharmony and another for unauthorized signage. The sign Ava and I had planted under the oak tree was now a disruption to community aesthetic harmony. I took a photo before they pulled it down. The HOA volunteer didn't even look at me when he did it. He just walked off with the stake under his arm, like he'd been told to. I kept the photo. Later, while walking Ava home from school, we passed Sarah again, this time with her son and a neighbor I didn't recognize. They were talking in clipped tones, words like appeal and legal advice floating in the air between them. When they saw me, they went quiet, but not out of fear. Something else was changing. Judith had pushed too far. She hadn't just violated privacy. She'd created a pattern, and patterns leave trails. All I had to do was line up the dates, times, and recipients, the drone logs, the citations, the memos. But I needed a keystone, a link that tied the memo directly to Judith without board. Approval. I didn't find it in the official emails. I found it in the metadata. The memo PDF had been authored on a private machine, Judith's, not the HOA server. No time-stamped review. No digital signatures from other board members. Just her initials and the original file name, Provisional Surveillance Memo Draft, Final V3.pdf. That file had never been uploaded to the member portal, which meant it had never been legally distributed, which meant every citation tied to that drone footage was, legally, built on sand. I printed the metadata and slipped it into a file, not for a lawsuit, not yet. This was for something better, a demonstration, a message, one she wouldn't see coming, and it wouldn't just be paper, it would be brass. I sat under the oak tree that evening with Ava's sketch pad in my lap. The wind stirred what was left of her chalk, drawing near the curb. Just a faint sunbeam now, the outline of a tree, and one scuffed initial where a scooter tire had rolled over it earlier. She sat beside me quietly, reading, one hand on my shoulder without needing to say anything. That hand had become a tether lately, a quiet kind of trust. She didn't need me to win, just not to back down. I opened the folder again and looked over everything one more time. The metadata printout, the citation copies, the HOA charter excerpts with red underlines, and the photo of our sign being pulled from the lawn by a volunteer in a beige polo. All of it was legal kindling, but I wasn't planning on filing. That would take too long. They'd bury it, delay, dismiss, and exhaust. But a well-timed demonstration? That could set fire to the whole foundation, and burn the lie where everyone could see it. I needed permission to make noise, not metaphorically, literally, and I knew where to get it. The next morning, I went straight to the municipal clerk's office. I'd used to consult with their city planner back when I was still working on state zoning contracts. They hadn't forgotten me. "You're applying for a what?" the woman at the desk asked, peering at the form. "Temporary use permit," I said. "Noise inclusion for peaceful demonstration. It's all within ordinance." She looked at the sound projection map I'd drawn by hand, highlighted decibel zones, proximity to public walkways, expected traffic flow. "This is the most organized application I've seen in 3 years, she muttered. "What exactly are you planning?" I smiled. "A musical protest, with community relevance." 20 minutes later, I walked out with a signed approval and a badge labeled Event Organizer. It allowed for one public demonstration between the hours of 7 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. on a weekend morning, provided it didn't block driveways or interfere with emergency access. Exactly what I needed. Next stop was the high school. Coach Landry, the band director, was standing by the bleachers, clipboard in hand, when I approached. His whistle dangled from his neck and his eyes narrowed when I explained. "Let me get this straight," he said, arms crossed. "You want the Ridgeview Marching Band to perform in front of a house?" "In front of a policy violation," I clarified. "It's educational. Civil liberties, property rights, civic engagement, all tied into First Amendment practice." He stared for a long second, then chuckled. "That's one hell of a lesson plan. I'll handle all the legal. You just need brass." 2 days later, I stood outside a storage unit in town where the local performance company kept spare uniforms. A friend of mine, Tasha, ran a nonprofit for arts access. I told her it was for a protest performance. She didn't even blink. "How loud do you want it?" she asked, unlocking the door. "Loud enough to be undeniable, but technically compliant. I took the decibel meter readings myself, tested them in the parking lot, cross-checked them with the permit cap, then lowered the range by 2 notches just to be safe. The goal wasn't to break rules, it was to obey them so completely that any pushback from the HOA would look absurd. That night, Ava helped me fold the last of the flyers. I didn't put my name on them, just a question. What happens when silence becomes surveillance? Below it, the time, location, and a short note. Bring earplugs. Bring your camera. By then, whispers had already started. Sarah had seen me at the school. Mason had noticed the printer job in the HOA office. He knew I hadn't submitted an appeal, and yet I wasn't panicking. I was preparing. Because Judith had her drones, but I had brass. And the neighborhood had seen enough silence. I found Mason waiting near the trail behind the tennis courts, just past the spot where Mrs. Dorsey kept her marigolds and raised beds. He stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, back straight, but his eyes shifted like he was expecting someone else to appear. Maybe Judith, maybe guilt. I can't stay long, he said quietly. If she sees me talking to you, she already assumes it, I interrupted. He gave a hollow laugh. Then I guess we're already past the line. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The drone wasn't in the air, but both of us glanced up anyway. Habit. Mason took something from his pocket, a folded piece of paper. At first I thought it was another memo or notice, but it was a printout, clean trimmed edges, one of the HOA's internal spreadsheets. I shouldn't be showing you this, he muttered, but I've had enough. I unfolded it carefully. It was a violation tracking log, columns labeled date, resident, clause breach, resolution status, and, highlighted in yellow, drone verification source. There were over 30 entries with that label. None of these were approved, Mason said, voice tight. No votes. No board discussion. Judith wrote the surveillance memo herself and slipped it in the addendum packet last quarter. I only caught it because I ran a checksum on the updated charter files last week. Her version didn't match the board-approved one. She forged it? Not exactly, he said. She buried it. Pushed it through during the storm damage budget review, when no one was looking closely, and the other board members. 2 don't even read the updates. 1 just signs whatever's put in front of her. I exhaled slowly. You've known this for a while, he nodded. And I thought if I ignored it, maybe it'd burn itself out. But then she used it on your daughter. And then the fines started doubling, and I realized I was enabling it. He looked away, jaw tight. I didn't want to be the coward in the room anymore. You're not, I said. He turned to face me fully. Are you really planning something? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Mason reached back into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive. Everything's on here. Original memo file, file history metadata, a copy of the board server log showing it was never uploaded through the official system. Use it how you need to. I took it carefully, the weight of it heavier than plastic should be. You sure about this? I'd rather be a former treasurer with a clean conscience than a compliant one with HOA immunity. He looked toward the trail exit and added, but you better make it count. She's got the board wrapped around her, but she's terrified of one thing. What's that? Being publicly embarrassed. He didn't wait for a response. He just turned and walked off, head down, like the air had finally shifted around him. That night, I stayed up late transferring the files to my secured backup. I cross-checked everything, metadata logs, version histories, even the time Judith edited the memo's file name. It all lined up. She'd authored the drone policy on a personal laptop. She'd backdated it manually. She'd never uploaded it to the board server, and she'd used it to issue nearly $10,000 in community-wide fines. The pattern was undeniable now. The story was complete, but I didn't want to bury it in legal filings. I wanted it to echo. At sunrise, I visited the city news station Darren had mentioned. I handed the producer a copy of the memo and a clean rundown of how the policy had never been legally adopted. He scanned it quickly. You're saying the HOA president has been running a private surveillance campaign without a vote, with penalties, harassment, and illegal citations tied to it. And you're protesting this? Not protesting, I corrected. Demonstrating. He looked up from the file. When? Saturday, 7 a.m. You'll want a camera crew. I didn't stay to answer questions. By now, the neighborhood was already buzzing. Word had spread. People weren't sure what was coming, but they knew something was. And thanks to Mason, I finally had the proof to make it undeniable. Not just paper, not just noise, a reckoning. Friday afternoon, the last band rehearsal wrapped just after 4. I stood behind the bleachers, clipboard in hand, watching as trumpets were packed away and drumline gear loaded into parents' trunks. Coach Landry gave me a nod across the field and held up a zippered folder marked Route and Staging. We'd finalized everything: time slots, starting point, directional pacing, even visual spacing between instruments to avoid traffic obstruction. He treated it like a homecoming parade. I treated it like precision warfare. As the students filtered out, I checked my phone again. No alerts from the HOA portal, no updates from Judith. She hadn't pushed back, not yet. Which meant she didn't know, or she was too confident to imagine a counterstrike this public. Either way, it was coming. By the time I got home, the mailbox held one more citation: violation of lawn aesthetic continuity. It referred to the freshly replanted sign Ava and I had staked beneath the oak, this time laminated and backlit by a solar stake. Our house, our rules. I left the citation untouched, let her think it landed. Inside, Ava was already prepping her sketch pad. "What's the sign going to say tomorrow?" she asked without looking up. "You'll see," I said. But in my head, I already had it printed. No surveillance without consent. Short, clean, impossible to spin. That night, I placed earplugs in a sealed bag, loaded water bottles into a crate, and confirmed the band's gear delivery with Coach Landry one last time. Every item was labeled, every sound level measured, every sidewalk inch accounted for. I wasn't marching for noise. I was marching for precision. I opened my laptop and reviewed the media packet I'd sent to Channel 9. It included a copy of Mason's spreadsheet, the fake memo, the citations issued based on drone footage, and the timeline of non-existent board approvals. It also included screenshots of the metadata logs. But the last page was different. It was a photo Ava had taken of the broken bedroom window, shattered glass, bent frame, a copy of her sketchbook lying beneath the sill, with red marker across a tree she never finished. That image didn't come with commentary. It didn't need one. Saturday morning, I arrived at the staging point by 6:20 a.m. The park across from Judith's cul-de-sac was quiet, mist hanging low over the grass, the kind of calm that wraps a place just before it breaks. The band showed up in waves, trumpets, brass, color guard. A few curious neighbors lingered near their porches, eyes wary, half expecting a block party. They didn't know what this was yet. The drumline lined up near the curb, bass and snare checking their straps. Ava walked among them, handing out earplugs. She wore a black hoodie with the same message printed across the back in white stencil: consent over control. Coach, Landry gave a 2-finger whistle. Decibel cap is 82. Don't go over it. I raised the meter, confirmed the first test beats. The needle hovered at 79. Safe. At exactly 7 a.m., I stepped onto the sidewalk and gave the signal. Snare rolled first. Then the bass kicked. Then came the horns, sharp, loud, coordinated. The final countdown echoed across Willow Ridge like a call to arms. Windows opened, phones came out, dogs barked, lights flicked on. And then Judith stepped onto her porch. Her bathrobe was pressed, her face unreadable. But I saw it in her eyes. Recognition. The kind of slow-blooming realization that doesn't flare into rage right away. Just confusion, followed by insult, followed by the ice-cold slide of losing control. I stayed on the opposite sidewalk, permit in hand. "You're disturbing the peace," she shouted, though the band was technically within every legal decibel limit. "This is a permitted civic demonstration," I said over the rhythm. Filed and approved under City Code 12.4.4, Community Protest Exemption Clause. She looked for Mason, but he wasn't on her porch. He was on mine. Standing under the oak, holding a clipboard of his own, watching her silently as the music surged. The band didn't march in circles, just one slow, deliberate pass down her street and out again. A full loop through the block, caught on at least 6 phones, 2 tripods, and, somewhere out there, Channel 9's rolling camera van. The last trumpet call rang out at 7:24 a.m. By 7:25, Judith had already stormed back into her house. The silence afterward wasn't peaceful. It was anticipation. The video hit 1,000 views in less than an hour. By noon, a trimmed version of the marching band protest appeared on a community watchdog account under the title HOA President Faces musical, reckoning over illegal surveillance. Someone had edited in red highlights around the drone footage citations and layered Mason's spreadsheet over shots of the band passing Judith's porch. The comments came fast, most of them from outside Willow Ridge. But inside, the real shift had started quietly. Neighbors who'd never spoken more than a passing hello were suddenly lingering at the curb, asking questions, comparing notes. Some laughed about the absurdity of a brass band showdown, but no one dismissed it. Because the citations weren't just mine anymore. They'd been everybody's. I took the day off work, not because I needed rest, but because this wasn't a fight I could monitor from a desk. I spent the morning walking the loop around Willow Ridge, watching how people reacted. One man pulled his car over to shake my hand. A woman passed me a printout of her violation log. 7 citations in 2 months, all tied to visual assessment. The memo was unraveling faster than I expected. By the time I got home, Ava was curled up on the porch swing, scrolling on her tablet. "You went viral," she said without looking. "Up. How bad is it? Depends who you ask. One lady on TikTok called you marching dad." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I felt lighter, just for a second. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown caller. I almost let it ring out. But something in my gut said answer. "Miles Kenner," I said. A pause, then a man's voice. Clipped, measured. "This is Gerald Fessler, attorney for the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association. I'd like to discuss a potential violation of your homeowner obligations in regard to community disturbance and unauthorized gatherings." My jaw tightened. "You're calling on behalf of Judith Merriweather?" "I'm calling on behalf of the board." "Which part of the board?" Silence. I pressed. "Because last I checked, there hasn't been a formal vote on drone surveillance since the charter update was ratified, and I've got metadata, a whistleblower, and over 30 documented violations tied to an unauthorized memo." More silence. Then, "This call is a courtesy, Mr. Kenner. There are options for dispute resolution that don't require legal escalation. Then you should tell Judith to stop pretending she speaks for the whole neighborhood." I hung up. 10 minutes later, Mason knocked on my door. "I just got a call," he said. "Same lawyer." Same tone. "She's scrambling." "No, she's cornered." He looked around, lowered his voice. "And she's planning something for the board meeting." "When?" "Tomorrow night. Emergency session." I nodded. "She'll try to make it about policy. Shift the narrative, or smear you personally," Mason added. "Claim you endangered residents, cited for disruption, maybe try to revoke your voting rights." "She can try." We sat on the porch for a while, watching Ava draw the new sign she wanted for her window. This one had musical notes around the edges and a message that said, "Eyes off. We see you too." "What happens if she does pull something legal?" Mason asked. "Then we escalate. Not in court, in public. She wants control, but she's already lost credibility." He nodded slowly. "I think a few of the other board members are wavering. I've seen them pull up the video more than once. No one wants to be on the wrong side of a headline that was the power Judith never anticipated. Not just truth, but timing. Exposure doesn't work in a vacuum. It only hits when the silence breaks at the exact right moment. And Saturday morning had done more than embarrass her. It had shifted the center of gravity. One more push and the rest would crack open. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m., but by 5:30, the library annex was already full. Neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder, some with folded arms, others with phones ready. A few carried folders of their own, copies of citations, annotated memos, even printed stills from the marching band video. No one was talking loud, but there was a tension in the air, like a building waiting for a gust of wind to snap its frame. Judith arrived last. She entered through the side door, flanked by 2 board members, Marla Denton and Alan Greaves, both of whom avoided eye contact with the crowd. Judith's blazer was sharper than usual, her hair perfectly in place, but her smile was thinner, stretched taut like a wire pulled to its limit. She didn't look at me. The meeting opened with the usual roll call, but the second she tapped the gavel, the real reason we were all there surfaced. "I've called this session," she began, "to address a serious and ongoing threat to the integrity and peace of this community." She turned her attention toward the center aisle, toward me. "On Saturday, a resident staged a disruptive and unauthorized event that not only violated the spirit of our covenants, but put at risk the tranquility and order we strive to maintain. This behavior, while perhaps amusing to outsiders, has real consequences. She reached for a folder and held up a document. We are moving to formally censure Mr. Kenner for willful endangerment of community safety and for inciting behavior detrimental to the HOA's function. A murmur rippled through the room. Beside me, Mason's jaw clenched. He hadn't told me she'd move this fast, or this aggressively. I raised my hand. Judith ignored it. Further, she continued, we are requesting temporary suspension of Mr. Kenner's voting privileges until the next election cycle, and the removal of all unsanctioned signage from his property. At that, I stood. You don't have the authority. She smiled coolly. I'm chairing this meeting, Mr. Kenner, and I'm invoking procedural review, I said, stepping forward. Because every single violation you've cited, from mine to Sarah's to the Jacobs families, was tied to a drone policy that never went through a community vote. I pulled a folder from my bag and handed it to the board secretary. Here's your memo. Authored on a personal device, no signature chain, no timestamp from the board system. Metadata proves it was backdated and inserted without ratification. Gasps broke out across the back row. Judith's mouth opened slightly, then shut. I turned toward the crowd. Everything she's done, from the surveillance to the fines to the threat against my daughter's bedroom window, was built on that one document. One she wrote alone. Mason stood beside me. I can confirm that, he said quietly. I was the treasurer when it was inserted. There was no vote, no board consent. Judith's voice snapped like a whip. Mason, you're not authorized to speak out of turn. I'm not under your thumb anymore, he said without looking at her. And neither is this board. The room shifted. You could feel it. The silence wasn't backing her anymore. It was circling her, isolating her. From the back, Sarah raised her hand. I'd like a vote, she said, to suspend Judith's authority pending a full charter review. Another voice joined, then another. Judith's gavel slammed down. This is a violation of protocol. But it was too late. The room no longer answered to her. I turned and walked to the exit, passing the same chairs that had felt so powerless just a week ago. Ava waited outside with the same sign tucked under her arm. When she saw me, she didn't ask what happened. She just handed me the tape. I want it back in the window, she said. I nodded, taking it from her. Judith's voice was still muffled inside the annex, but the wind had changed. The board knew it. The neighbors knew it, and now, so did she. They moved the public confrontation to the community green. Too many residents had shown up for the annex. The HOA claimed it was to accommodate the crowd, but everyone knew what it really was: containment. Open space, no walls for voices to bounce off. Fewer places for things to go viral. Didn't matter. By the time I arrived, folding chairs formed uneven rows under the afternoon sun. The podium was propped on the makeshift stage near the fountain. Judith stood behind it, her posture brittle and controlled, like a porcelain statue bracing against wind. The rest of the board sat behind her, Mason among them, but this time, he didn't look down. Neighbors lined the grass in tight pockets. Some stood, some sat on picnic blankets. A few had kids with them. One woman held up a sign that read, HOA not equal to surveillance. Another had printed a picture of Ava's cracked window. Judith tapped the mic. It squawked once. We are gathered here, she began, to address a deeply unfortunate campaign of misinformation. A scoff from the left side of the lawn, she pressed on. It is true that surveillance policies have not yet been fully integrated into our bylaw infrastructure, but let me be clear. They were drafted with the intent of improving neighborhood safety. She glanced at the camera crew positioned off to the right. Channel 9 had shown up with a tripod and a boom mic. No live stream, but close enough. Judith adjusted her notes. What's been framed as an abuse of power was, in fact, a necessary enforcement tool, one used in response to increasing noncompliance. She looked straight at me. Mr. Kenner's actions, while dramatic, were disruptive. They endangered the calm of this community, and they set a dangerous precedent. I stepped forward. The mic was open. I didn't need permission. I turned to face the crowd instead of the board. My daughter used to sleep through the night. A hush fell, sudden and sharp. She used to draw under the oak tree, ride her scooter past the fountain, and read by her window. I pointed toward the image someone held, her cracked window in full view. That ended the day a drone, unauthorized, illegal, and operated under a fake policy, shattered her. Sense of safety, Judith shifted behind me. The board rustled uncomfortably. You didn't vote on it, I continued. You didn't notify residents. You didn't authorize surveillance through any legal process. I held up the flash drive. This contains the memo metadata, authored by Judith, never uploaded to the board server, never signed, never voted. Yet it was used to justify fines, threaten families, and target anyone who questioned her authority. A pause. You all got citations? You all saw your mailboxes tagged. You all looked over your shoulder. I looked directly at Judith now. And while you were hiding behind forms and fake protocols, we filed a sound permit, gathered our neighbors, stayed within every rule this community ever wrote, and still made you listen. Someone in the crowd clapped once, then another, then a ripple. Mason rose from his chair. I move for immediate suspension of Judith Merriweather as board president pending charter review and resident vote. Marla Denton, to Judith's right, looked up in alarm. That's not procedurally. It's allowed under Clause 5.1 emergency ethics provision, Mason replied. He turned to the crowd. Do we have majority support for the motion? Hands rose, dozens of them, some slowly, some high and furious, but more than enough. Judith didn't speak. She didn't yell. She didn't slam the gavel. She simply lowered her hands and stepped back from the podium. It was over. The board dissolved the meeting 5 minutes later. Channel 9 requested follow-up interviews. Neighbors stayed in clumps, whispering and clapping each other on the back like a weight had finally slid off their shoulders. I didn't stay long. Ava waited by the oak with 2 rolls of tape and a new sign of her own. She'd drawn it herself that morning. We are not quiet anymore. We walked it back to the window together. Sunday morning came quiet. No drone, no citations, no beige polos sweeping through the streets with clipboards. Just the wind rustling the leaves above the oak tree, and Ava's soft footsteps on the porch as she set out her sketch pad in the sun. I sat beside her with my coffee, letting the stillness settle, the kind that felt earned, not temporary, the kind that followed after something hard and necessary had finally broken loose. The vote was official. Judith was removed from the board pending full audit. Mason had stepped in as interim president, and already the language of the HOA's communications had changed. Transparent, measured, without threat. The drone clause was being struck from the charter, every citation tied to it, revoked. Refunds were being processed, public apologies drafted. But none of that was what mattered most. Ava slept through the night. For the first time in weeks, she didn't check the window before bed, didn't ask me to leave the hallway light on. She just curled up under her quilt and said, "You fixed it." I hadn't. Not really. I couldn't undo the fear, or the sound of glass breaking, or the way she'd flinched every time the wind caught the blinds just right. But I had done something else. I'd made sure she wasn't invisible. The neighbors started waving more, not just polite nods, but real gestures. People knocked on our door to thank us. Some brought over cupcakes. Others just stood there for a moment, not knowing how to say what had shifted. They weren't just grateful, they were awake. The most unexpected moment came from Mrs. Dorsey. She shuffled up our driveway carrying a cardboard box sealed with duct tape and labeled HOA Originals, Do Not Trash. These were from the old charter days, she said, before Judith rewrote everything. Thought you might want to see what this place was supposed to be. Inside were photos of block parties, paper copies of neighborhood voting results, and a yellowed flyer from 15 years ago that read, Willow Ridge, built for community, not control. Ava helped me tack that one to the inside of our kitchen cabinet. Later that afternoon, I walked the path behind the tennis courts where Mason and I had once stood in silence. He was there again, this time with his sleeves rolled up and a box of old policy folders in his arms. Feels different now, he said. It is. You still planning to resign that sound ordinance consulting gig? He asked. Not yet. Might be useful again. He laughed. I hope not. But just in case. I saved you a chair at the next meeting. We could use someone who understands structure, someone who doesn't flinch when things get loud. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. When I got home, Ava was sketching again, this time drawing the oak tree in full bloom, the sign under it, the sun behind it, and 2 figures sitting beneath it. We taped that drawing in the window where the old glass had cracked. The replacement frame had come in, but I hadn't put it up yet. Somehow, it felt right to leave it for just one more night. Not as a scar, but as a reminder. That silence is never neutral. That rules without consent aren't order. They're theater. And that sometimes, the only way to be heard is to make them hear you. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.